college football, man, seismic activity all over the sport. Let's just call it that. And a lot's going on. There's a lot of speculation out there right now. I want to warn you to be careful, but the first thing I want to do is I want to ask you a little question, and then I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 minutes to sort of marinate on it. What do you think about Notre Dame? Not your prediction on where they're going to land. Everybody's got to guess. Big Ten, Independent, ACC, none of that. We'll talk about that in due time. I want to ask you very simply, what do you think about Notre Dame? If you're in your mid-30s or if you're in your mid-50s, 60s, you've watched college football your whole life, oh, you've got an opinion of them. You know you do. I was raised in the South. I was raised to not exactly view that Golden Dome in the most endearing of fashions. What do you think about Notre Dame? I want you to think about that for a second, and then let's circle it right back around to where we are, and I'll tell you why all that matters in just a second. You'll notice on this show, the other night and tonight, we don't really have any fancy graphics for you where we guess which teams are going to wind up where. And there's a reason for that. It's a very, very fluid situation. And in fluid situations, you just end up looking stupid when you try and do that stuff. There's a tweet flying around out there right now that's got millions upon millions of impressions and tens of thousands of retweets. It's just utter foolishness. I'll reference it in a second. I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, there's some speculation to be had. Let me tell you 2 things I know. Okay? Well, let's deal in the definitives for just a second here. 2 things I know. One of them is that we're in an information vacuum. This happens in recruiting sometimes. If a kid is really, really tight-lipped, in the absence of any tangible information, one rumor gets out there on a message board or on talk radio or whatever, and it just spreads like wildfire because there's no other information to be had. The problem is that one bit of information is not information at all. It in and of itself was false, but because the kid's family's not talking and his uncle's not talking and he's not talking, that's all you had to go on. That's kind of what's happening here. And I just want you guys to be careful. I know everyone wants to sound like they know what they're talking about here. I being the person who's behind the mic representing this entire operation, I've been willing to tell you I don't know when I don't know. And in this case, I don't know. I don't know who's going to land where, but I can tell you there are a lot of things moving. You know, I actually do have some people I can call about this. There are a lot of things moving, obviously. Don't fall victim to this, though. Don't fall victim to speaking in definitive terms about things that we really know nothing about. Consider this. The actual moves that have been made, i.e. Oklahoma, Texas coming to the SEC, i.e. UCLA, USC coming to the Big Ten, who was talking about that until the hour before the news broke? Who was talking about that? Do you know how hard that is? Here's how tight-lipped and secretive that operation was. Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner last year, did not know OU and Texas were leaving. George Klikoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, did not know USC and UCLA were leaving until the news broke. They literally found out when you and I did. They had to look at a phone to find out. So if that gives you any indication as to how tight-lipped all this is, then it's probably wise to just sit back, toss your feet up, and when it happens, it'll happen. The second thing I know, though, and this one's more personal for me, but the more I talk to you guys, I think a lot of you feel the same way. Or maybe you don't. You can tell me. The more I hear people tell me about how much money these changes in college football are going to make, the more I want to walk out this door and jump out the window. I don't care. I'm going to tell you, I don't care about how much more money these media rights deals are going to bring conferences. I don't care, and my humble opinion is you should not care. Not only are you not going to see a dime of that money, not only are your ticket prices and parking and concessions and everything still going to go up magically, no matter how many hundreds of millions more dollars in the coffers, not only will these moves choke off a large portion of the underbelly of the sport, and I don't mean that pejoratively, not only is all that true, but also think about this. Could I suggest to you that growth and financial increase are not necessarily tied at the hip here? You can add money and not necessarily be growing the sport. Now, to some folks out there who I have heard nationwide this week, that's not true. Some out there would indicate to you that as long as you're making more money, that means by default the sport is growing. Well, I don't particularly believe that. Allow me to illustrate it for you. What if a network came to me yesterday and offered me $50 million a year for Late Kick? They want to buy the property of Late Kick, and I accepted it. One of their conditions is I can only talk about the CFL. So we're going to talk Canadian football. This is going to be a Canadian Football League show now, but we're making $50 million a year. So what did we do with the show? Did we grow the show? I grew my bank account. Did we grow the show? Would you be in this chat right now? Would you be on Twitter? Would you be in my DMs? Would you be slapping me on the back when you pass me on the street saying, good for you? You know, you're going to talk about stuff I hate, and I couldn't care less about the show anymore because it was built on college football. That's why I love it. You're changing everything about it, so you'll never see me again. But good for you. You grew the show. Of course you wouldn't say that. That would be ignorant. You would say, in chasing the almighty dollar, you just completely ruined everything that was great about your show. Now, I'm not going so far to that extreme when it comes to college football. There'll still be a lot that we love about college football, but I think that some amongst us are looking at this from the wrong angle. Some are looking and saying, well, how could this not be good for the sport if that many millions more dollars are coming in? Well, I'll tell you how. It's if that many millions more dollars is tied to changing things fundamentally about the sport that are some of the key reasons you and I love it. And I don't think you and I are alone. That's the point. So let me go back to the question that I asked you about 5 minutes ago. What do you think about Notre Dame? I think you may be guessing how this ties in, but I think you're wrong. This is not going to be a segment about me speculating where Notre Dame's going to go. I think they may join a conference, may not join a conference. Your guess is as good as mine on Notre Dame. I'm pretty sure those guys and the folks around that situation have been tight-lipped enough to where there's no good information on that either. But I don't want to ask you that. I want to ask you, again, like I did to start the show, what do you think about Notre Dame? I grew up in West Central Georgia. No one likes Notre Dame down there. Well, no one who is native to Georgia likes Notre Dame. And so it was a Southern football mentality, and they were the Golden Domers. They were up north, and you'd see documentaries, and you'd hear names like Newt Rockne and Ara Parseghian, and those were ghosts to me. They were gone long before I came around, but yet because of my reverence for the history of the sport, I did just that. The root word, I revered them. So I looked up to them, but at the same time, I was taught not to like Notre Dame. And as I got a little bit older, then I started to understand the context of why I wasn't supposed to like Notre Dame. I wasn't supposed to like them because they think they're better than you. They think that they should be able to operate under a different set of rules. This is what was taught to me, of course. They're up there in South Bend, Indiana, and whereas you have to play in a conference, and by the time I'm growing up, you got to go win a conference championship, they don't have to do any of that. They can control their own schedule. They get their own TV deal, and whomst are they to be able to get all that? Well, it turns out Notre Dame's who they are, and that's why they get to do that. Anyway, I had a healthy amount of animosity for Notre Dame growing up. And over about the last 10 years, I would say, that shifted. I've talked about this on the show a few times. That shifted in my mind as I observed the changes going on in college football, as I watched the implementation of the playoff, as I watched most recently NIL, the portal, a lot of things that are changing the sport. Some for the better, some not for the better. But I'll tell you where Notre Dame comes into this equation. There's this really interesting overlap right now. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but there's this just a fascinating overlap right now in college football. You got Group A, who has been perma-mad at Notre Dame. They've always screamed at Notre Dame, you need to get with the times, you need to join a conference, you don't deserve to operate under any different rules than the rest of us. Then you got that same group over here on the other side of the fence, and they're yelling at college football and the powers that be. How could you rip away at the fabric of the traditions of this sport that I love so much in the name of money? And then Notre Dame's over in the corner saying, which side are you on? Do you want change for change's sake, chasing money, or do you want to cling to tradition because that's all we were doing the entire time? You don't think people put tons of money in our face, including right now? We've told them no before. We've actually been one of the only entities out there to pass up big dollars to cling to what we view as our foundational principles and traditions at Notre Dame. Is it different than the rest of the country? Yeah, it may be. Do you have to like it? No, you don't. But at the very least, if you're claiming you don't like the direction of college football because of the reasons, you should respect us for clinging to ours. And that's where I've been for quite a while. And I've taken some flack for it. I talk about the Rose Bowl the same way. I've had a newer found respect for the Rose Bowl, whereas a lot of folks yell at them and say, you should get out of the way. Rose Bowl, you should get out of the way. Don't be so steadfast in maintaining certain aspects of the tradition that have been baked into that game for so long because you're standing in the way of us overturning the rest of the sport, blah, blah, blah. I'm all for the Rose Bowl. standing pat. I'm all for Notre Dame standing pat and as long as they want to, clinging to a lot of what the rest of this sport could stand to learn a lesson or two from. Now, as for the future, I know there's a lot of speculation. I've used the word about 10 times. Now, I know there's a lot of speculation out there about what is next. Is the Big Ten going to go poach several teams from the Pac-12? Is the ACC going to enter into one of those fabled loose partnerships? What's your favorite loose partnership in history, by the way? Is there going to be a loose partnership between the ACC and the Pac-12? I will tell you what isn't true. What isn't true is what I saw floating around out there way too high profile today, and that was a report, according to a source, that ESPN was trying to void their deal with the ACC so that 4 of the ACC's teams could join the SEC. Yeah, I'll go ahead and unequivocally tell you that's BS. So we'll shoot that one down here. Now, as for what will happen is still undecided. Some of the very people in the room who will make the decisions on this would tell you, if they had to tell you the truth, I don't really know. And that's where everyone should be at the moment because there is nothing to know. Some of the motivation, though, I think I can somewhat explain. For instance, if you were wondering why the ACC would ever even venture into some partnership, scheduling partnership, whatever you want to call it, with the Pac-12, well, it really comes down to, and I know this is going to shock you, money and survival in no particular order. What you need to know right now is the biggest elephant in the room by 10 miles is the upcoming Big Ten media rights deal. Heard me talk about it on the show a lot. We thought it was coming, and now the USC, UCLA monkey wrench gets thrown into the plans, and now they go back to the drawing board, and it's probably going to be August, maybe even the start of the season before we see that media deal inked, and that's not even knowing what Notre Dame's going to do. Anyway, multiple someones, as it seems, are going to give the Big Ten a whole lot of money. That we know. We don't know the exact number, but that we know. Now, think beyond that. If you're the ACC, if you're the Big 12, if you're the Pac-12, you know not everyone who's bidding on that Big Ten media rights deal is going to win. And there's going to be a lot of money, going to be a lot of funds that have been allocated towards purchasing Big Ten media rights deals that are then just left on the table. So the thinking, whether it pans out this way or not, is another story, but the thinking is, well, if I'm the Big 12, I want to be as attractive as possible because I want to be there for Apple, or I want to be there for CBS, or I want to be there for Amazon, or whoever was in the race for those Big Ten media deals and they missed out because they're going to have a lot of money to spend, and there aren't really any other big media rights deals that I see on the horizon for college football. I want to have a product that's desirable enough where they pay me enough to where it makes a difference long term. And maybe I don't start out on equal footing when the dust settles and it's us and the SEC and the Big Ten left as the real big boys on the block, but I can grow myself because I'm making enough in those media rights deals to grow myself. Well, the ACC looks at that and says, I'm not interested in that whatsoever. So why don't we enter into a loose partnership with the Pac-12 and we can cut that merger off at the pass and we can really choke off the Big 12's ability to do that. Sounds convoluted, doesn't it? It's really not. It's not even necessarily chess. It's just a more advanced version of checkers. That's what's happening right now. Here's the problem. You've got folks at Utah, and you got folks at Clemson, and you got all these folks who are on the phone with one entity, and then the other one, they're just texting. Like, I don't even doubt that's pretty close to what the reality is. No one knows who they can trust. No one knows where the television partner really fits into this equation. There are some trains of thought out there that ESPN or Fox or CBS, they're really kind of pulling the strings behind the curtain. And then there are other schools of thought that everyone is in a holding pattern until the Big Ten does what they do, and then we'll kind of reassess. It's convoluted. But I did want to tell you this. We did have some scoop the other night. And I know some of you saw it on Twitter, but I haven't shown this to you on the show. Behind the curtain is interesting because when you get behind the curtain, you learn how things are really operating. You learn how the operation is really going down. Now, I know in the SEC, Greg Sankey is a pretty front-facing commissioner. Everyone knows he's driving the bus. Do we really know who's driving the bus in the Big Ten? I know the commissioner there is Kevin Warren, but therein lies the scoop that we had the other night. A buddy of mine happens to live part of the year out of the country, part of the year in the country, well, part of the year in the continental United States. He's down in the Cayman Islands the other day. And he was not alone in the Cayman Islands. Keep in mind, the Big Ten's deal with USC and UCLA has just broken a day before, I think, maybe 2 days before. And as I said on Twitter, a Pate State source spotted Kevin Warren, Big Ten commissioner, in the Cayman Islands. In the Cayman Islands. So I ask you, friends, do you really believe that Kevin has set up shop in the Cayman Islands and he's running point on everything from down there? Or, alternate, do we believe that there may be some other power players behind the scenes, perhaps with the initials JD, that formerly held a very, very front-facing position in that conference? I hope I've been clear enough. I'm a believer that Jim Delaney is still heavily involved in this. And that's not baseless. That has been said to me by a few people. So it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, what's going to happen is going to happen. It's just kind of interesting how things are happening versus how you may perceive them to be happening. So I do believe there are moves coming from the Big 12. I have no clue what happens beyond that, nor does most anyone else out there.